All right, everybody, welcome. My name is Tim Peel, and I'm the program coordinator with the NRA Hunter Services Department. And I'd like to talk to you today about, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope everyone had a great hunting season last year, and we're here in Hunter Services as our main focuses are the Hunter Clinic Instructor Program, Youth Hunter Education Challenge, and what we're here to talk today about is our Hunters for the Hungry program. First off, I'd like to talk about our website. As you can see on the slideshow, we have done our research and tried to get a contact for every Hunters for the Hungry, Hunters Feeding the Hungry program in the country. On our website, we have this map where you can click on each state and it will hopefully direct you to your state's program. So, for example, if you were to click on Maryland, you would find the Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry program with a link to their website, their address, and calling number. I'd like to introduce our special guests, Josh Wilson, who is the Executive Director for Farmers Feeding the Hungry in Maryland, and we have Justin Ross here with the Delaware County of Ohio Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry. So, Josh, let's talk a little bit about fundraising. How have you gotten a lot of your fundraising in the state of Maryland and around the country?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. And first off, I do want to thank you for having us and for hosting this webinar. I know one of our goals has always been to help as many hunters as possible feed the hungry of their communities by donating their extra harvest, extra deer, extra elk. And part of the way we can do that is just sharing information, letting people know how these programs work, and then also answering questions and pointing them in the right direction if it's something they'd like to get involved in, whether that's donating a deer, perhaps supporting it financially, volunteering with an existing program like ours or organization, or starting something up and linking up with one of the organizations and getting a chapter or an area started if they don't have anything currently going on. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you for this opportunity to help people better understand how it all works and maybe point them in the right direction and hopefully get some folks that would like to follow up afterwards with us or get them connected with the program in their state if it's not Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry. But as far as fundraising goes, that's
Josh,
probably the, yes.
one quick thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to let everybody know that we are here to take questions. So use the chat dialog box, send us a question, and we'll get to it as we see fit. And I apologize for interrupting you, Josh. Go back ahead.
No, that's fine. Yep, very good point, because we certainly would like to answer questions as they come in to better tailor this for what kinds of things people would like to know. Fundraising, that's funny that we start with that one, because I guess for any organization, whether you've ever raised money for your son or daughter's baseball team, or you've been involved in an organization, or your church is doing a capital campaign, nobody likes to talk about raising money. But I think the hurdle, first off, that we all have to get over is just recognizing that what we're doing is inviting people to participate in a very valuable service and provide some much needed protein through this meat to the people of the communities that have a need. And the worst that someone can say is no, or I'm not interested, or I already support that in some other way. But as far as that goes, I'd say the fundraising that our organization tends to do, and Justin might have some thoughts on this locally in Ohio as well, but it's the whole gamut. We have everything from individual donors that give once a year, maybe a couple times a year. We have some monthly donors. There are some events. We're not, by and large, an event-driven organization the way that some of the other conservation groups tend to be or may be. But that's fine. So we do have some that will do a dinner or a banquet, maybe an auction type of an event. We're getting more involved in the social media and the peer-to-peer side of things. I think as more people just in general become comfortable with making donations and purchases online, we're starting to see a larger number of people that are comfortable donating to work like ours online.
So, what I noticed you had a very active Facebook page for the Maryland chapter of Farmers Feeding the Hungry.
Hmm.
Um, do you do a lot of social media other than that?
Pretty much Facebook is what took off for us. Don't really know why. We started a Twitter account and page about the same time, and also did a little bit of work on Instagram. But Facebook's the one that just really took off. I think we would like to work on all three, given that they're three of the largest social media platforms. But I think the real key there, from what I've seen, is just engaging with people, providing content that's of interest, helping people better understand and see the kind of work that your organization does, and the kind of work that volunteers or even donors, in this case with the hunters giving their deer, what's being accomplished.
Justin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just like Josh was saying, we're not a huge event, I guess, driven fundraising organization, but we at certain local levels we found niches with other nonprofit organizations to get the message out about feeding ministries or just in my case farmers and hunters feeding the hungry, um, but as well as just talking to local churches that have the food banks. And when you find I guess your end result, if you're giving that meat to a food bank at a church and they're doing a monthly or a bi-monthly, whatever, food bank or pantry type situation, a lot of times in our situation, or my situation here, those churches are want to get on board and help out, and that's another way that we've been able to raise some money, is just from the actual source where you're given the meat.
Hmm. You said special events like banquets. Do you think that would be a very beneficial program to have in a sense of just getting the word out there and promoting the program?
It certainly can
Yeah,
be. Oh, sorry, Justin, go ahead.
I was going to say it certainly can't be kind of the same words, that it helps because when all of us, we're all promoting conservation and using our natural resource to feed other people. So, if we're all alone, just farmers and hunters feeding the hungry, if we're stand alone and don't link up with other organizations that have a following and to get that message out, we're kind of separating ourselves. So I feel that as we get this message out and link with other nonprofit hunting organizations or um, conservation organizations, that that gets the message out to more people quickly, instead of just being our own little thing. It's a way that we can all connect and network and really get the message out.
Yeah, and we've done a banquet here in the Hagerstown area in Maryland where we started, for, well, this will be our 16th banquet. We're having it in just a couple weeks in March. And I would say that the style of the event is probably more what you'd find with a mission or a service organization. If anyone's familiar with, say, Fellowship of Christian Athletes or the High School Outreach Mission Young Life, they pull people together, give them a nice evening out, share a meal, have the opportunity to share the mission, explain how it works, give them some examples, some visuals to think through, and then provide the opportunity to link up in support. And then there might be, like with ours, we do a silent auction and a few live auction items, so we raise some funds that way. But just like Justin said, I think getting people educated and knowledgeable about what we do, so that it is something that they could decide on whether they'd like to get behind and become a supporter, whether it's once a year, a couple times a year. We do mailings through regular postal mail. One of the things I see from time to time is, despite what you've heard, fundraising through the regular mail is not dead. There's this big push for everything to be online these days, but getting something tangible through the mail is still the number one, in most cases, the number one thing that drives people supporting or continuing to renew support for an organization. So yeah, it all kind of links together, whether it's the social media, online giving, regular giving through the mail, inviting folks out to an event. The more ways we can get the message out about what we do, the more likely you will grow that list of supporters who get behind your work. You know, the mechanics of it, the logistics, that's a whole other side. You know, I think most of the organizations out there like ours and you know, there are 34 other programs across the country. There's Virginia Hunters for the Hungry, Kentucky Hunters for the Hungry, New York Venison Coalition. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but you can find most of them right there on your site, as you showed a few minutes ago. And we have them listed on our site too as another resource. Most of those groups are going to have an online giving page. They probably have a social media page, different ways people can give, different events they're going to be promoting. So if someone's going to get involved either as a donor financially or a volunteer to try to help with one of the organizations, there will be some mechanisms and some mechanics in place that can be used. Most groups will probably have some type of a pledge card or a brochure that has a panel on it that people could use to mail in a donation. So if you're going to go about that work of fundraising in the community and trying to build support, there will be tools available, whether it's with our organization or one of the others, to help with that.
All right, let's move forward to our next little bit on butcher selection and partnership. Do you have any qualifications that you need butchers to meet, or?
Right. Yes, we do. I guess the bedrock principle that we've always operated under is that we recognize people that are receiving meat at a food bank or a soup kitchen have had no opportunity to see where that meat got processed. So if you flip that around, when we as hunters take our deer to a local processor or a local butcher shop, we get to decide, hey, do I want to have my deer processed here or not? Do I feel good about this? But given that the people receiving the donated deer don't get that opportunity, we want to make sure that we are partnering with and working with butchers and meat processors that would pass the bar, be up to snuff, if you will, for where we would take our own deer. So for many, many years, that meant that we set the bar at basically requiring that the participating butchers either be a USDA or state agricultural inspected processor. Some states the USDA does it, some states have their own agriculture department do it. So these would be like your markets and butcher shops that may all do slaughtering of livestock as well as the deer. They may get sides of beef in and do the processing there, and they're inspected to do that kind of work, and then they also do deer and elk. So that for the longest time is how we functioned. Some of the other organizations that are out there, I don't believe have used that standard. Some have kind of adopted their own process, maybe for visiting and making sure places looks like one that you would want to work with. We did start kind of doing some of that ourselves as Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry just a few years ago. We put together kind of a set of criteria that our local coordinator can use when visiting a deer processor that's not already inspected. Not to do an inspection per se, but simply to kind of check off some boxes, looking at how long have they been in business, how did they learn the trade, do they have their own liability insurance, do they have a clean water source, you know, just some of those basic kinds of things, doing your homework so that if anyone ever examines this or asks you, why did you feel this was a good location to work with, you're able to point to that and say, well, we did some homework and we felt that this place had their act together. They've got the experience, they have a good customer base that's satisfied with them, and so forth. So qualification wise, and that's what we look for. We do ask that each place, as I mentioned a moment ago, have their own liability insurance. As far as then just the mechanics, we use an annual agreement that we ask each processor to sign, where we have, going back to the funding side of it, our volunteer would take a look at what they've got kind of in the bank, if you will, in their chapter fund, and determine, okay, based on that amount, we can have the processor do this many deer for the year. So if it's $60 per deer, at that particular location, they find that they have, $600 in the bank, well, they're going to be able to have them do 10 deer to start out. So we have them sign an agreement. That way, the processor knows what they're getting into for the season, and we hopefully avoid situations where they've done way more deer than what they had the funding to do, and maybe you're going to have to wait on a payment or perhaps not get paid. I know that in the past, as we've talked to butchers that have worked with previous programs in places around the country, one of the number one gripes that we've heard is, well, we signed on with this program, we processed 30 deer, and I didn't get paid for 6 months till 6 months after the season, or I never got the entire payment on what we agreed on. So we don't want that situation. We depend on these processors to be the kind of the front line recipient when it comes to the meat. So they're our representative, and we want to make sure everything's working well for them, that they're confident in their partnership, their relationship with the program, and can do the work for the folks when they show up. And if they don't have any more in their deer allocation, they can let folks know, this is all I had to do this year. This is the number that we were able. And sometimes that spurs on people to get involved and figure out how more funds could be raised in their community to increase those totals. So there's an agreement they sign with the processing price and the number that we can afford to have them do. We have them keep a log sheet where when a hunter brings a deer in, they provide their name and some contact info along with the tag number from the deer. We also have a log for the pickup of the meat. So the food bank shows up to pick up, say, 10 boxes or a certain poundage. We have them complete a log so that when the processor sends in a bill for a number of deer that they've handled, they can show here were the donors to back that bill up, kind of documentation, if you will. And then at the end of the season, here's where the meat went. And we have these logs signed from the local food banks showing that we did follow through on it and got the meat to them.
So we have a question.
Sure.
If you're conducting a banquet, what food would you recommend if you use venison? Are there any issues with local health departments?
Good question. We've done basically, we haven't done game banquets, game dinners. A lot of churches I know do those. There are other organizations that do those. When we've done banquets, at least the one we do here locally, like for example, our food comes from Outback Steakhouse. We struck up a partnership with them 16 years ago where they have donated the meals. So they come out, they cook it, they serve it. I would probably recommend, just for the very reasoning that was in the question, so that you're not getting involved in any issues with the local health regulations or the state, since you might be selling tickets for the event, so you've got people paying to come in, and then you're serving them food. You probably just want to get that from a caterer or a local restaurant. That's not to say that it can't be done as a game dinner, but I would probably just recommend that if that's going to happen, maybe have one of those local churches or another organization that's already doing game dinners have the event, host the event, and make the venison donation program the beneficiary of it. I think one other thing you could run into with using venison or game meat is just the perception that, well, shouldn't that meat have gone to the food banks? Why are we using it in a fundraising venue? So I've had people ask that kind of question in the past. And so for those reasons, we've just always stuck with, when doing our own events, we've stuck with caterer, restaurant, that type of thing.
So with the butchering process and the procedures that go into that, do you guys have any recommendations on how far along process people should bring their donations in?
I can take that one, Josh, if you want.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
I think some of that depends on the butcher themselves. I know some guys that are contracted with butchers that want the animals already skinned, obviously field dressed. That's without saying it should be field dressed. But some butchers want them skinned or have that requirement. But my personal butchers that I deal with do not. They would rather you bring the animal in a whole. If you're going to donate that animal, but would like a shorter amount, then they some might charge you, some might not, to go ahead and skin that out to give you that, what you need for a shoulder mount. But I think that it kind of comes down to the butcher, because you're at that point, you're under what their obligation is to their facility. And that's what I've ran into. Typically, we see them being dropped off whole.
Right. Yep. I would echo that. The field dressed, checked in with whatever format the state requires for the state in question, and then dropped off whole if possible. I know some of the health folks I've talked to here in Maryland, the real experienced guy that actually does some butcher inspections for us on the to enable some butchers here to participate that maybe wouldn't have otherwise. I know he shared with us one time just kind of like the basic concept of the least amount of processing that can be done before the animal gets there, the better, because that's fewer surfaces of meat coming in contact with potential contamination, whether it's through skinning, quartering, or what have you. Now, that said, we recognize that that's not always the most feasible. I've had folks in the western states that say, well, it has to be quartered. You can't bring a whole elk off the mountain. Understandable. And so geographically, regionally, there are going to be some differences to that that just make it not feasible to bring the whole animal in with the hide still on it. But as Justin said, in most cases, we do see the deer being donated whole, field dressed, hide still on. Processor takes it from there. And then as far as the type of processing that's done, some of the organizations I think have it all ground. We kind of go with kind of a combination of with our organization, we kind of go with what does the processor typically do in their community for the hunters, what gives the best price or the best rate to us, combined with what format does the food bank or soup kitchen best able to make use of. So for example, if it's a food pantry that gives out portions of meat to families, it's nice to be able to give them a roast that they can use for a few days as leftovers. If it's a soup kitchen where they do a lot of spaghetti or tacos or sloppy joe type meals, then obviously ground meat's going to go further for them.
Excellent.
I always have the discussion with my butchers to let them know that it is their facility. So if meat is being dropped off, whether it's quartered, whole, skinned, however, that it is up to their discretion, because they are the professionals in the butchering end of the whole organization. And I make sure that they know that I am completely comfortable with them saying, hey, that's foul, or that won't pass the test. And if they don't want to butcher it, then they don't have to. Because obviously at the end game, you don't want any, you don't want meat that's tainted to go into these food banks or pantries. So that's one major thing that I always do, is have that discussion, that they know it is up to their discretion whether they butcher that animal or not.
Correct. Yep. Good point, Justin.
Great. Josh, we've got a question for you. I've had some processors in Carroll County, Maryland, during firearm season tell me they can't take a whole deer donation because they're too busy. Is this something that you've addressed with these butchers before contracting them, or?
Yeah. That's, I guess the unfortunate thing is, you do get to a point where there can be a bottleneck during certain seasons, whether it's the regular firearm season or you might have a muzzleloader season in a particular state. But yeah, here in Maryland, when we hit that firearm season, there are instances where I think the priority for donated deer maybe goes down the list a little bit when these shops really get slammed with deer. And I guess I'd just have to say that the reality of it is, in most cases, the butchers are doing them for us at a discounted rate, more like a wholesale type thing. And so when it comes down to them choosing between their customers that are paying full price or taking some extra donated deer, if they reach capacity, they will start telling folks that they just can't handle any donated deer at that point. I'd like to think it wouldn't happen, but I guess that's just a reality of how it works. So yeah, sorry, unfortunately, I don't know that it's something that we can do. Again, since we do try to negotiate a discount with them, most of the time, things operate just fine, but you can get into those, particularly the weekends of a firearm season or the few days early in a week after a weekend, where the opportunity to donate might be more restricted or more limited. We can also hit that from a financial standpoint, where the processor knows they're reaching their limit of what we can afford to have them do, and they're concerned about doing more because they might not get paid. And so we encourage them as they reach that point to check in with us, and if we're able to increase the allotment to them, if it's at all possible, we try to do it. We try to find funds other places, check and see if a butcher's behind on their quota, and maybe we can shift something around. It's not an exact science. We just kind of do our best as it goes and try to keep the opportunity for people going as far as we can each season.
Great, great. Yeah, it is pretty hard working with all these guys who are doing this stuff out of their own pocket and as volunteers, which leads us into our next topic as volunteer roles. Josh, you're the expert on recruiting these butchers to work for you and getting the discounted rates. Do you have any wisdom on maintaining and recruiting new volunteers?
Well, I'll certainly let Justin speak to this too, as one of our longtime volunteers. I think just like with fundraising, the key to attracting people to your organization or your mission as a volunteer is education, making the information readily available online, locally, in as many ways as possible. We do in some areas where we have a pretty decent operation. For us, that would be Maryland, Ohio, and parts of southern Indiana, where we have a pretty good number of processors and so forth. We do some state hunting guide ads, and we always put in that we welcome new volunteers in that way, reaching out through social media. So I think it's just a matter of making sure people know that there's always an opportunity to be involved as a volunteer, whether that's jumping onto a program or a chapter that's already running, or starting maybe from scratch, or restarting if it's kind of been dormant in an area for a while. Making that known, it would be the key, just one person to one person. As far as responsibilities, ours is hopefully pretty straightforward. We just ask the volunteers to be the ones that are responsible for finding the butcher to work with, finding the food banks that would like to utilize the meat, and I think we're going to talk about them a little bit before we wrap up. Getting the word out about the program, that it exists, that people have the opportunity to participate, and then going right back to where we started, raising financial support. So as those butcher bills come in, there's some funding on hand to send checks out to the butchers. With our organization, we try to take care of as much of the business side of it as we can from our office in Maryland for all the volunteers, regardless of what state they're in. So that means, giving them all those opportunities, all those tools for raising support, like we were talking about earlier, all the mechanics of it, whether it's giving online or mailing something in. So we handle, the depositing of all the gifts, the entering of the information into a donor database, reporting that information back to the volunteers. Then when bills are coming in from the butcher shops, our volunteers send those to us, and we send a check back out to the butcher from the money that was raised. When it comes to working in each state, there's various requirements. You have to, in some places, be registered as a business or an organization, a company in that state just to be able to operate. When it comes to soliciting money from people, you have to register, you have to renew that. There's a number of states across the country, many of which require that. So we do all that each year and maintain it. So again, a volunteer can just get back to working with the butchers, working with the food banks, inviting people to participate, inviting people to support it, and not have to worry about the headaches of what goes on behind the curtain, if you will, to make something like an organization work. Liability insurance, we could just go on and on about the things that we try to keep our volunteers from having to worry with.
Excellent.
The butchers are play a very key role in what I kind of call the triangle. You've got this triangle of the volunteer or the local guy that's taking the roll up to get this going, the coordinator. Then you've got the butcher, and then you've got the end user at the food bank. And that butcher, obviously, a lot of butchers have been doing animals for a long time, so they know a lot of people. They know the game wardens. They are a good middle person to, when you get to know some of these butchers, when other people drop deer off, they say, how can I help? Well, then the butcher will get you in touch with them. And so the butcher is a very key role in the whole volunteer process. Even though we do pay them, they are very key in getting the word out to a mass amount of people.
Excellent. These volunteers as butchers, I've even heard of some states where they don't get paid at all, and it's incredible that some of those guys do that much work and use their own freezer space as a volunteer donation for these food banks and churches. Just as a side note on that.
Absolutely, yeah, and that is, that is kind of something you give a big shout out to those locations. I think in general, you tend to see smaller numbers of donated animals, and it's understandable that a person, a processor could only allocate so much time or space when they're not going to get paid at all, and they've got people working for them, they've got property tax to pay, and all the things that go along with running a business. So in places where there is an active program, I think you tend to see larger totals, but that's not to diminish at all the contribution of those that do it at no charge or at a drastically reduced rate, or even those who say, okay, and I'm thinking of one right here in Maryland. I know you only had me down for 30 deer, and that's all you could afford for this season. I did 90. Here's the bill. If you have anything more that you could pay me for a few more of those, great, but I wasn't going to turn anybody away. So, that whole spectrum of participation from the butchers, regardless of whether they're being paid and doing 300 deer or volunteering it completely and doing 10 deer, I like to think more on a person-to-person level. There are a lot of people that ate because of that effort and that willingness to be part of it. And so everybody has value in terms of the processors and the volunteers that coordinate things for us.
I've even heard of
the butchers. I was just going to say the butchers know where the need is as well, because they're cutting meat year round, whether it's custom cutting, it's spare animals, or it's deer. They know where that need is. So as a chapter coordinator, as you talk to the butcher, they help you get in touch with the food banks. And then like Josh said, with education, as you talk to the food banks or the pantries, then they're like, oh, well, I can deal with this butcher down the street to get your meat. Absolutely, this is another avenue of you getting some protein. And it really speaks to the volumes of what the butchers do for any of these organizations.
I guess the only other things I would add about volunteer roles, we've often found that the most effective, I don't know if effective is the right word, probably some of our chapters that tend to experience some pretty good success or see good growth are places where the volunteer that originally signed on to be the coordinator with us is able to pull together several other people, whether they call it a team or a committee, or it's just them and a few of their friends or family, so that they can kind of tackle it together. I know some places where one person handles the fundraising, one person handles the butcher connections and relationships, and one works with the food banks, and then maybe they all three work on promoting it in the community together. So that team aspect is something that unfortunately is probably lacking in our organization, even though we try to encourage it. And it's probably lacking in lots of different organizations, not just Venison Donation, where ideally you'd have multiple people. But hey, if it's just one person that's able to do it, then we'll work with them. And it's the other part I'd add there, in addition to a team, is that someone might think, well, I don't know that I could raise a whole lot of money. Maybe I could only find enough support in the community for 10 deer. Is it really worth it? And we'd say, well, that could be as much as 10 deer could yield as much as 500 pounds of meat. And that's, if you do that in quarter-pound servings, that's enough for 2,000 meals for people. So never think of it in terms of just 10 deer, just 5 deer. Those are people that are going to be helped, even if that's all you're able to accomplish.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to our publicity slide. Josh, we've already talked about website and social media and how postal mail can be one of the best forms of return on investment for donations. Do you guys do anything with local media or radio, TV, anything like that?
We do, yeah. We encourage, again, through the volunteer network, at least on the local end. We do encourage the coordinators to maintain some contacts with the local media, newspaper, radio, TV. Send them updates. Have that information at hand, that contact info, so you can let them know when the season's coming. Remind them that maybe they'd like to do a story about the program in the community. I know at holiday time, Thanksgiving, Christmas, those are the times that I've seen for the most part where hunting season's in and a lot of news stories focus on those in need and the efforts to feed and clothe and house them. And so outlets are often looking for interviews or stories where they can share the information and the story about a particular program or organization. So yeah, I would say that's definitely a key aspect of getting that publicity going, in addition to the things we've already talked about, and keeping it in front of people. Email's another good one. I don't know that we talked on that one before, but just right there in the mix, trying to collect that piece of information when you have contact with people, whether it's your donation forms, including a spot for email address. Obviously, when you do get something online, you usually get an email address with that. So putting that together, and if it's something where it's a local effort and you're just communicating with 50 or 100 people, that's probably something you can do just through your email client or email provider, whether it's Gmail or Yahoo or something of that nature, or you're using a desktop program like Outlook. If you get into larger numbers, then certainly there are services like Constant Contact, MyEmma, and so forth that you can buy into that usually have tiers of pricing, and we can look at all that. I mean, as an organization, we do that. We have an account and we send out kind of an update email newsletter, if you will, every month, and then some appeals or opportunities for people to give a few times a year. But that could be done on the local level too. And we try to be flexible with our volunteers, and I would hope and assume that a lot of the other organizations are the same way. If someone asks, hey, could I do this or could I do that, whether it's with email or social media, we try to find a way to help them make that happen. And if it's something they're not already familiar with, we'll try to get them pointed in the right direction or do as much of it as we can from here to kind of walk them through it or to get it set up.
That's great. Do you have anything to add on that, Justin?
No, I think Josh covered it fairly well. I mean, on a local level, obviously Josh is running this whole organization and keep in touch with guys in Maryland as well. But here in Ohio, I've been doing this for 12 or 13 years now. And, just staying in contact with the people that are donating to you, the local media stuff, talking to local writers for papers, or using social media for that, that side of it. I mean, social media can reach so many people so fast, and your local community, that it keeps the word out, and people know how to get in touch with you if they, if they have a question, or how do I do this, or how does this work. That's where I don't email, I guess, per se as much, just because at a local side I see a lot of guys around town, or at the butcher shop, so I can just face to face talk to them.
Do you guys see a response to your social media or emails? Do you get a lot of people who are in states where they don't have programs that are looking to either get involved or to start their own program?
Yeah, we do. Um, and so we get opportunities to communicate, like through Facebook Messenger. We'll get messages that way, or emails that come in from someone that found themselves or signed up for our email list. I think we get a lot of people that get kind of connected with us that maybe didn't right off the bat look to see if we were active in their community, or if there's another similar program. And then hunting season approaches and they start thinking about whether they might be able to donate, or we also hear from food banks and soup kitchens that would like to participate and receive and serve the meat, butchers that would like to be part of a program, and so forth. So yeah, we do have opportunity to communicate with folks, find out where they are located, and then see if there's a match in our organization. Maybe feel out whether this is something that they'd like to take on, if we're not serving there, or if there's not another organization already present. So we can kind of gauge the best response or the best kind of direction to give them based on the information they give us. And yeah, we've had people start chapters. We've had people contact us, and then we connect them with another organization. Maybe it's like Hunters Sharing the Harvest in Pennsylvania, or Hoosiers Feeding the Hungry in Indiana, going down the list, and they check it out, and then I might check back in with them, and they say, hey, that's exactly what I needed. Thanks for getting me connected with the group that I was looking for. So again, just like we said at the outset, I think even more so in recent years, we've started to recognize that the role that we can play, in addition to operating our own chapters, our own program that has butchers and meat going to the food banks and the fundraising and all that, the role we can play in addition to that is just helping people get this done for the people of their community, whether it's through us or not, because ultimately we want to see people fed.
Keeping the website, keeping a website up to date, which Josh does very well, is key. In December, I was out in Colorado doing a late season cow elk hunt, and I had a couple guys ask me out there about donation programs, and it's very simple. With a website, you can pull it up, and we've got a spreadsheet right there that shows, per county, or finding the butcher in your area, or clicking on a map. But it's very easy to get that message out through the website. Hey, this is who you need to contact, or if we don't have somebody, this is who you contact to get that set up.
Do you guys run into issues where I know a couple different states that don't allow donations of wild game meat. Does that happen very often, or what is your guys' experience with that?
Yeah, I guess there certainly are some situations like that. We really haven't encountered it too much in the states where we've been operating. As I'd mentioned, we've got Maryland, Ohio, we've got a few places decent in southern Indiana, and then we've got another, number of coordinators across about 18 or so, 19 other states. So all told, we've worked in maybe 20, 25, 22, 25 states over the years. And I don't think we've really encountered too many issues with that, although I have, like you, Tim, I have heard that. I know in particular there was one state where I believe it was regulated in a way that soup kitchens and shelters that were cooking on site could not use game meat because it didn't carry a USDA certification or stamp, but pantries that were giving meat to people to take home and prepare themselves could. So you'll find these kind of nuances, and that's the kind of thing, I guess, where if someone's got a question, if we don't know the answer, usually we can figure out where to try to find that answer, whether it's the health department or the ag department in a given state, and making a call or an email and trying to find out, find the information they need.
Great. Let's move forward to our food banks and ministries section. You seem to have mentioned that a lot of the food banks that you work with are recommended by the butchers that are in the areas that just know their industry and know their needs. Do you guys have any strategies on recruiting new food banks and like ministries to participate in the program?
Justin, do you have any thoughts on that? I have a few I can share, but give you a chance.
Yeah, I don't really have anything directly other than I guess like you said, my butchers have led me to some of the food banks that I didn't know existed, but other sportsmen's organizations or conservation clubs I've dealt with in the past have led me in that direction as well, because these sportsmen's or these conservation organizations or conservation clubs have been around for a long time, so they know the community, they know who's doing what, and those organizations have pushed me to find other food banks as well. And with the food banks, they're not used to, obviously, when you when you start talking to somebody and you tell them you're going to give them venison or deer meat, they're a little befuddled. They don't know what to do with that. And in my situation, as we talked about earlier, I have everything ground into 1 pound packages because it's just very easy for them to hand out or to cook with in mass quantities. But once you start, developing that relationship and telling them how to use the meat, then everything just falls into place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, typically most states, most areas in a state are going to have, well, let me back up. You can kind of come at this from the top down, or you can come at it from the bottom up. If you're coming from the top down, there are food bank networks. Feeding America is one that most of us are probably familiar with, and we've had partnerships with a lot of the member food banks in that group over the years. So you can find information online about food banks that exist that cover whole states or regions of states if it's a larger geographic area. And then each of those food banks are going to have kind of members or partners that work with them in the community that get food from the food bank. So there are ways to explore and find those outlets from that direction. You could also kind of go from the local level upward or just pursue it locally. You can look and see if your community has kind of like a council of churches or a ministerial group where a group of ministers, pastors may get together each week or each month, and part of what they do is to assess needs in the community and keep track of what kinds of resources are available. You've got community action councils and agencies that also keep track of that kind of information. I know when we get one of the types of communication that we receive that I kind of forgot earlier is from people looking for assistance. And they find us as a feeding organization, and they call or they get on Facebook and communicate and ask where they can get some meat. So again, just like trying to link a potential volunteer up, we go to work trying to figure out if we're serving in that area. If we're not, we look and see if there's one of the other venison donation programs or Hunters for the Hungry programs. And if that comes up empty as well, then I just sit down and do a web search and look for food bank or food pantry and insert the name of their town or their county. And there are a couple different resources online that will pull up names of churches and other organizations that provide food assistance in that town or in that county. And I'll just go down the list with them and provide, okay, have you contacted this group? Have you tried this group? So kind of maybe got off on a little tangent there, but that same kind of technique could be used to identify groups that you could reach out to and say, this is a program that we've organized. Here's a resource that we have. Can you use frozen food items? Could you have a use for frozen meat? And if so, here's what we do. Would you like to be part of it? I think, for somebody starting up with us, usually just finding that one butcher that would participate in at least one food bank that can use at least all the meat that that butcher has, or if not, then maybe find another participant, one or two more. That's a starting point. And if you're successful, if you will, in terms of the education component and just getting the word out and the kind of the exposure of what the program is and how it works, then you will have other butchers that make contact and ask if they can join, and you'll have food pantries and churches making contact too, seeing if they could get on board either in the current season, or if you're off season, then they're maybe looking ahead to the fall.
Great. Now, talking about the responsibilities of the food banks, just like the butchers, are they contracted, or is it just on good faith that they'll accept the meat?
We don't have usually, I don't think, a formal arrangement with those outlets. We would have kind of like a list that the butcher would have, a call list. And usually if it's us doing it, and I think most of our volunteers do it sort of the same way, we would ask the butcher to try to kind of work their way through that list over the course of the season and get as many of the agencies as possible, some of the meat. But the responsibility then comes down to the food bank being able to go and pick that meat up. That's not something we ask our volunteers to do. Again, just from a liability standpoint, we try to keep everything as simple as possible. So you've got hunters bringing their own deer into the butcher shop. The processor takes care of getting it cut, wrapped, and frozen. And then they call one of the agencies on their call list to send a volunteer from the organization to come and pick it up. So that way our volunteers, again, can just focus on keeping those connections active and finding the support in the community financially to get as many deer or elk processed as possible. So yeah, I mean, the qualities we would look for would be that they are, an active organization that is able to get out to that processor as quickly as possible once they get that call. Because in many cases, just like we talked about earlier, you get into a busier time of the season, processor needs that meat out of the freezer so they can handle the next batch of deer that are coming in. And the last thing we need is the processor to call 2 or 3 times and they just can't get anybody to come out and get it. So we've, unfortunately had agencies that maybe didn't get any meat in the season and they ask us about it. We go back to the processor and ask, and they say, well, I called them 3 times and nobody came, or they didn't even call me back. So I moved on to the next one on the list and they were there the next day. So it's kind of like, if you can get there and get it and maintain that connection with the butcher, your agency should be able to get some meat from the program that season.
All right. And as far as joint publicity, do you see a lot of publicity coming back from the ministries and the food banks in the area that drive more volunteers, or do you get a better response on your own publicity?
I would say it's some of both. I've seen cases where the communication, if the food pantry, the food bank, or the church does a lot of their own social media work or their own newsletters and that kind of thing, and they make mention of their partnership and the meat that they've received, and they're showing pictures of it being prepared and served and so forth, and mentioning our organization, then that certainly helps. We try to mention some of those groups as well. If we see something like that being lifted up on social media, we try to repost it to our page and thank them for being a participant, so we get some of that kind of joint synergy going. It's definitely an area that could be improved upon, something that we could and do hope to build a better sense of networking from the local level on up with the different organizations and partners that play a role. Justin, do you have any thoughts on publicity with the local agencies?
Not directly with the food banks, but again, it goes back to the butchers that, the hunters are going to the butchers. And if the butchers, obviously, if they're contracted and they like the program, they're gonna promote the program back to the hunters. And the hunters are as much of a volunteer with this whole organization as what we are as a chapter coordinator, because they're the ones that are bringing the meat to us to be able to supply to the end user. And one thing I guess that I like to say at a joint publicity is tell those hunters, hey, if you guys are donating and you can buy more tags and you can keep hunting, do that, because it's not only promoting conservation, but you're spending time outdoors and you're helping your local community by feeding them. Don't quit hunting because you filled your freezer. Go ahead and keep on hunting. Maybe take a buddy, take a first timer out there, and maybe he can harvest deer and donate it to feed other people. And that's where I see this joint publicity kind of taking shape, is with the actual hunters.
Yeah. Yep.
Great. Well, we've kind of reached the end of our presentation. I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information up there. So if you have any further questions about this webinar, feel free to reach out and contact me. And if it's a question for Josh or Justin, I can definitely put you in contact with them. We're going to have a follow-up webinar later on in the year to cover more topics in the meat donation industry. So keep an eye out for that. Josh and Justin, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
The only thing,
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, you can too, Justin, but I was just going to say again that I think one of our commitments this year as an organization is to do more work in trying to network together with the other venison donation programs that are out there. As I had mentioned, there's at least 34 of them that we've listed on our site. And Tim, I know you guys have the map and the listing, or the ability to find a lot of those groups on your site too. But I think there's a lot that's being done. We're probably going to have somewhere around 500,000 meals added onto our total, maybe 750,000 this season. That's kind of the range we're in, it looks like. And that's going to bring us right up very close to 21 million servings since 1997, when Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry started. But I do recognize, and we realize, that we are one organization and there are others doing similar work. And I believe it's been kind of a fragmented part of the industry, or if you call it the conservation world, over the years. And there's definitely a need for some greater collaboration, communication between the different organizations. And so that's something I think we're going to focus on this year. Again, just out of a desire to see as many people as possible across this country be able to help feed their needy neighbors, and from our standpoint, bring glory to the Lord, who we believe has a deep desire and a great passion for everyone who's hurting, everyone who's in need, to be helped by their fellow man. So that's our goal, one of our goals for the year, and we're just going to keep at it. And Tim, we appreciate this partnership with NRA Hunters for the Hungry to help see that through.
Absolutely. We'd like to extend a big thanks to you two for calling in on your own time, and thank you for spending the last hour with us. So if anybody who's listening has any questions, now is the time.
Tim, I would just like to quickly say, tell you thank you for letting us be a part of this webinar and help getting the word out. And obviously the NRA has a voice, and we all have voices, and the use of our natural resources, this meat, it is the foundation of our hobby or our lifestyle of hunting and conservation in general. So, we all are one in what we're doing here, and no matter what organization it is very necessary that this word gets out, that these feeding ministries are available to hunters and people that would like to donate towards that, donate monetary, funds to help keep these organizations running.
Absolutely. Those are very important to us. So, no questions have been asked. it's coming up on 5 o'clock. I think we'll all get out of here on time today. So again, thank you, Justin, and thank you, Josh. Josh, we look forward to hopefully seeing you around headquarters soon. So give us a shout out if you're ever in the area.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
All right.